A woman throws a child into an icy hole and vanishes into the night. It seemed he had no chance of survival. But at the last moment, fate delivered an unexpected twist, changing everyone's lives forever. Night settled over the placid waters of Melville Lake, cloaking the surrounding pines in silent darkness. A distant moon reflected on the rippling surface, providing the only hint of light across this remote stretch of wilderness. Few ventured here after sunset, given the biting wind that whipped between the trees. But that night, a single SUV, headlights off, rolled onto the gravel parking lot by the old wooden dock. Inside the SUV, a young boy named Jeremy Parker pressed himself into the corner of the back seat. 12 years old, small for his age, Jeremy was dressed in a too-thin jacket and jeans that had holes in both knees. He clutched his phone tightly in his hand, but the battery had died hours ago. His stepmother, Lucinda, sat behind the wheel. She hadn't spoken to him in nearly half an hour. Their last words had been cold, final. The sharpness in her voice had left him trembling, though he kept silent, afraid to provoke her. A strong wind rattled the vehicle's windows. Jeremy stared anxiously at the deserted lake. Usually he loved the water. On summer days, he would kayak or fish with his dad, Philip Parker. Tonight, however, the lake looked like a slab of black glass, iced over at the edges but still darkly swirling near its center. A primal fear began to churn in Jeremy's chest. He fought the urge to cry out, to yell for help. No one would hear him, not here. When Lucinda killed the engine, silence engulfed them both. She turned to Jeremy, her pale eyes glinting in the faint glow of the moon. "Get out," she ordered. Her voice held an eerie calm, a brittle edge that turned Jeremy's stomach to knots. He did as he was told, stepping onto the cold gravel. Lucinda came around, grabbing him by the arm. She escorted him toward the flimsy dock that extended into the water. The boards groaned beneath their combined weight. Jeremy felt the sting of the wind slice through his jacket, but the deeper chill came from Lucinda's tightening grip. "Why are we here?" He finally dared to ask, his teeth chattering. She offered a hollow smile. "Don't pretend you don't know," she whispered. "You've been snooping around, talking about things you don't understand. It's time you learn about consequences." He had no idea what she meant. He only knew that in the past weeks, Lucinda's mood had grown darker, more secretive. Jeremy recalled her heated phone calls, the times she'd vanish late at night. Now he realized something far more sinister might be lurking beneath her forced kindness. A gust of wind howled, seeming to push them forward. Lucinda gave no sign of hesitation. She led Jeremy down to the very end of the dock. A single flickering lamp on a post revealed the surface of the lake, dotted with shards of early spring ice that cracked softly against the wooden beams. Jeremy's breath caught in his throat. He tried to yank free from her grip. "Dad will be worried," he ventured, voice quivering. "He'll call the cops." Lucinda scoffed. "Philip's not here. This is between us." Her gaze flashed with an unidentifiable emotion. Hatred, perhaps. Then she shoved Jeremy once, forcing him to kneel on the wet planks. Terrified, Jeremy bit his lip. "Please, you can't." Before he could finish, Lucinda heaved him upward by the collar of his jacket and propelled him off the dock. With a single strangled yelp, Jeremy toppled into the icy lake. The water clenched him like a frozen fist, robbing him of breath. He tried to kick to the surface, but the weight of his drenched clothes dragged him down. Through the stinging cold that numbed his face and hands, he caught a glimpse of Lucinda's silhouette above him. An inexplicable finality in her stance told him this was no joke, no accident. She meant for him to die here, beneath the dark water, never to speak again. And just before the world blurred into icy blackness, Jeremy managed a breathless whisper that didn't quite carry across the waves. He wanted to cry out for his father, to condemn Lucinda. But all that escaped was a single desperate word, devoured by the night. A battered pickup truck pulled into the parking lot by Melville Lake a few minutes later. The driver, Bill Anderson, was the overnight maintenance worker at the Morningside State Park. He'd ended his shift early, deciding to take a quick drive around the park's perimeter to check on some suspicious sightings reported by visitors. Bill wasn't a cop, but he prided himself on his vigilance. The wind whipped harder as he stepped out of his truck, scanning the area with a powerful flashlight. Moonlight revealed only the deserted dock and the distant shape of an SUV that was now speeding away. He narrowed his eyes. Visitors at this hour? Rare. Suddenly, he heard a faint splash and a muffled cry. Instantly on alert, Bill shone the flashlight toward the dock and saw a disturbance in the water. A pale hand sinking beneath the ripples. Without hesitation, he sprinted to the edge of the lake. "Hey, is somebody out there?" he called, his voice echoing across the open water. No answer came, only the soft lapping of waves. Bill cursed under his breath. He couldn't just stand there. A life was at stake. Peeling off his jacket, he lowered himself onto the wet wooden boards, aiming his flashlight across the lake's surface. A swirl of silver told him exactly where the person had gone under. With a bracing gulp of air, Bill dove in. The shock of the cold water nearly seized his limbs. He had to force himself to keep stroking forward through the darkness. His heart hammered, but he managed to push the panic aside and focus on the search. Slowly, he groped around underwater, fighting to keep his eyes open in the frigid lake. At last, his hand collided with what felt like a jacket sleeve. He grasped an arm and pulled up with all his might. It took every bit of strength he had to haul the small, unconscious figure toward the surface. Emerging with a strangled gasp, Bill forced himself to remain calm. He hauled Jeremy's limp body up to the dock, somehow mustering enough power to lift him out of the water entirely. The boy's lips were bluish. He wasn't moving. Panic twinged in Bill's gut. "Come on, kid, breathe," he shouted, slapping the boy's cheeks gently to rouse him. Seeing no response, Bill launched into CPR, pressing down on Jeremy's sternum with steady compressions. His own teeth clacked from the cold, but he refused to stop. Between compressions, Bill yelled into the night, hoping someone might be near. In the emptiness, only the whistling wind answered. After 3 rounds of compressions, Jeremy sputtered, then coughed violently, expelling water from his lungs. Bill exhaled a trembling sigh of relief, continuing his rescue breaths and compressions until Jeremy was able to breathe raggedly on his own, though still semi-conscious. "You're okay, kid," Bill kept repeating, his voice firm and reassuring. "Just hang on." He reached for his phone and with shaking fingers dialed 911. As the operator answered, Bill's words tumbled out in a rush. "I've got a child pulled from Melville Lake. Hypothermia, possible drowning. He's alive, but he needs an ambulance. Now." It didn't take long before the shrill wail of sirens approached from the nearby highway. Bill cradled Jeremy's head, trying to keep him as warm as possible with a blanket from his truck. The boy's eyelids fluttered, but he made no coherent sound beyond faint moans. Bill's heart wrenched at the sight. He didn't know who had left this poor kid for dead, but he vowed silently that he would do everything possible to make sure Jeremy got help, and that whoever was responsible would not get away with it. By the time the ambulance reached St. Helena's Medical Center, Jeremy was teetering between consciousness and an all-consuming chill. Paramedics had managed to stabilize him, but his core temperature remained dangerously low. Within moments of arrival, hospital staff whisked the boy into the emergency department, where a trauma team began a barrage of treatments: warm IV fluids, heated blankets, a ventilator close at hand. The doctors' voices overlapped in urgent commands, their movements swift yet controlled. Philip Parker arrived at the hospital in a breathless panic. He nearly collapsed at the nurse's station, shouting his son's name. He wore a wrinkled shirt and mismatched shoes, apparently having dressed in a state of desperation. One of the nurses, a tall man with a calm demeanor, put a hand on Philip's shoulder. "Sir, please, we're doing all we can. We just need you to wait until the doctor gives you an update." Philip's hands shook as he tried to process the nurse's words. His mind spun with unanswered questions. Why had Jeremy been out at the lake? Where was Lucinda? How had this even happened? At last, a doctor emerged from the emergency suite, pulling down her surgical mask to speak. Mr. Parker, I'm Dr. Schultz. Your son is stable for the moment. His temperature is still critically low and his lungs took in quite a bit of water, but he's alive. Philip felt his knees give. Relief flooded him, though terror still twisted in his gut. Can I see him? In a moment, the doctor replied gently. We need to run more tests and ensure he's not going into cardiac complications, but he's responsive enough to open his eyes briefly. I suggest you let him rest for now. It's going to be a long night. Before Philip could respond, a commotion erupted at the end of the hallway. Bill Anderson had arrived in soaked clothes, water still dripping from his hair. 2 security guards tried to guide him to a seat, but Bill insisted on identifying himself to the medical staff. I'm the one who saved that boy, Bill said between labored breaths. I pulled him out. I need to know if he's okay. The doctor nodded. We're grateful for your quick actions. You likely saved his life. Bill glanced at Philip. You must be his father. Philip swallowed hard. Yes. Thank you for... He couldn't finish, tears threatening to spill. Instead, he gripped Bill's hand, and the men locked eyes in a silent moment of gratitude. Just then, the automatic doors slid open again. In strode Detective Michelle Foster from the Morningside Police Department. She wore a plainclothes suit and carried a small notebook. We have a possible attempted homicide involving a minor? Her tone was official, but her eyes flashed with genuine concern. Philip frowned. Wait, what do you mean homicide? Are you saying someone tried to kill my son? Detective Foster looked at him gravely. Mr. Parker, the security footage from the lake's visitor center captured a car leaving around the time your son was found in the water. We suspect foul play. The words hit Philip like a punch to the chest. He tried to steady himself against the wall. My wife, Lucinda. She was the last person with Jeremy. She said she was taking him to grab dinner tonight. He never came home. An uneasy hush fell around them. Dr. Schultz excused herself and returned to her patient, and Bill took a few steps back, uncertain about the family's dynamic. Detective Foster pulled out her notepad. We'll need a statement from you, sir, and we'll need to locate your wife immediately. Philip's head swam. He recalled the tension between Jeremy and Lucinda, the hushed arguments. He had noticed how his once affectionate spouse had grown distant, how she would seclude herself in the study for hours on end. But never in his wildest nightmares did he think she could harm his child. Lucinda, he whispered, eyes glassy. She wouldn't do this, unless... His memory raced through half-recalled suspicions. Missing money from a joint account, late-night calls from unknown numbers, unexplainable bills in Lucinda's name. The detective jotted everything down methodically. When we find her, Detective Foster said firmly, we'll have more answers. For now, keep your phone on. Let us know if she tries to contact you or shows up here at the hospital. Before Philip could respond, the nurse returned, beckoning him to Jeremy's side. Bill lingered in the hallway, shaking his head in disbelief. Detective Foster watched them both, her jaw set in determination. Inside the dimly lit ICU, Philip felt his heart clench upon seeing his son. Jeremy lay connected to monitors and IV drips, his skin pale. His lips parted slightly as he drew shallow breaths. Unspeakable rage brewed in Philip's chest. Rage at himself for not protecting his child. Rage at Lucinda for what exactly? The doctor's words came back to him. He's alive, but it's going to be a long night. Jeremy's eyes fluttered open for a few seconds, and Philip rushed to his side. The boy's voice was faint, barely audible over the rhythmic beeping of machines. Dad, Jeremy rasped, his throat raw from the ordeal. Where is she? Philip swallowed. They're looking for her, he answered, trying to sound calm. Listen, son, you just rest now. Everything's going to be okay. But Jeremy struggled, wanting to say more. She tried to... His voice broke. A tear escaped down the side of his face, and he squeezed his father's hand with surprising strength. Philip shut his eyes, fighting his own tears. I know. You don't have to say it. Outside the ICU, Detective Foster had begun to piece together Lucinda's story. She interviewed Bill Anderson, who recounted his shocking discovery and rescue of Jeremy. Then she contacted the dispatcher, who informed her that the local police had found the abandoned SUV near an off-ramp on the highway. Lucinda was nowhere to be seen. Meanwhile, hospital security was quietly tightened. The staff locked the side entrances at Detective Foster's request and placed an officer at each exit. A sense of ominous expectation filled the corridors. If Lucinda really intended to finish what she'd started, as Detective Foster feared, she might head back to ensure that no one was left to accuse her. Philip refused to leave Jeremy's side, so Bill found him in the waiting room later that night, carrying 2 cups of coffee. I don't know you folks, but I can't just walk away, Bill told him. The cops might want me for statements, but in the meantime, can I do anything to help? Philip accepted the coffee gratefully, though his stomach churned too much to drink. I appreciate that, he said. I don't even know why Lucinda, did this. It doesn't make sense. Bill sighed. The detective's got a theory. Something about your wife's finances and a couple of past incidents. Philip stilled. What kind of incidents? As if on cue, Detective Foster approached, holding a thin manila folder. Mr. Parker, I'm sorry to unload this now, but you need to see it. She flipped open the folder to reveal photos, grainy images of various men and older women in different states of vulnerability. Your wife, Lucinda Monroe Parker, has been connected to at least 3 suspicious deaths in other states. We suspect she changed her name and used false identities. Trembling, Philip peered at the photos. She said she was from Ohio, he murmured numbly. She had a few distant relatives, but I never met them. I never questioned it. That's her pattern, the detective explained. We believe she marries or befriends someone who has assets, gains their trust, and eventually orchestrates their accidental death. It appears she tried it on your son. Maybe she thought she could eliminate him as an obstacle. Philip's hand covered his mouth in horror. He remembered how Lucinda had insisted on a life insurance policy for Jeremy after she and Philip married. At the time, it seemed like a simple precaution. Now the pieces fit together in a sickening puzzle. Rage flared in Philip's eyes as he looked up from the photos. If she tries to come near Jeremy again, I swear... Detective Foster gave him a measured nod. We won't let that happen, Mr. Parker. We have officers around, but I need you to keep your phone on and stay inside this hospital for your own safety. Just then, a shrill ring shattered the quiet. Philip's phone lit up with an unknown number. On instinct, he answered. Philip? Came Lucinda's cold, clipped voice. How's Jeremy? Philip felt his heart pound against his ribs. You monster, he spat into the receiver. He's alive, no thanks to you. Lucinda let out a mirthless laugh. Tough kid, but I have a way of finishing what I start, Phil. Give him my regards. The line went dead. Detective Foster scribbled notes, her expression grim. Philip stood there, phone clutched in his hand, his pulse roaring in his ears. Find her, Philip demanded. Stop her before she tries again. Without another word, Detective Foster turned to her fellow officer. They hustled away to coordinate a search. Bill lingered, eyes flicking from the detective's retreating form to Philip's tortured face. It's going to be all right, Bill offered softly. The cops will track her down. Philip exhaled shakily. She's out there, Bill, and now she knows Jeremy survived. For hours, the hospital corridors remained tense. Nurses whispered rumors. Security guards gripped their radios. Outside, the wind had risen to a howl, flinging rain against the windows in sheets. Philip stayed in Jeremy's room, perched on a plastic chair, occasionally dozing off only to startle awake at every passing shadow. Then, somewhere around 3 a.m, the lights in the hallway flickered. A sudden hush fell upon the entire ward. The overhead speakers, usually piping in a soft hum of easy-listening music, crackled ominously. Philip felt the fine hairs on his arms stand on end. At that moment, a figure stepped into the ICU corridor, Lucinda. Her wet hair clung to her forehead, and she gripped what looked like a scalpel in her right hand. A night shift nurse yelled in alarm. Lucinda's eyes burned with cold determination as she advanced toward Jeremy's room. Within seconds, all the tension that had been building erupted into chaos. Philip woke with a jerk from a half-sleep. He heard the nurse's scream and leapt to his feet. On the monitor, Jeremy stirred, awakened by the commotion. "Dad?" the boy croaked, voice still raw. Philip stood protectively in front of Jeremy's bed, his heart hammering. "Stay back!" he roared, as Lucinda appeared in the doorway, the scalpel glinting under the fluorescent lights. Outside, security guards scrambled, but Lucinda had somehow slipped through their perimeter. Detective Foster was sprinting down the hallway, calling for backup. Lucinda's eyes landed on Philip. She raised the scalpel. "Get away from him," she snarled. "You have no idea what's at stake, do you? You ruined everything." Philip spread his arms to shield Jeremy, adrenaline coursing through his veins. "It's over, Lucinda. The police know everything." She let out a twisted laugh, stepping closer. "The police can't prove a thing if no one's left to testify." Before she could lunge, Bill Anderson charged in from behind, tackling Lucinda around the waist. The scalpel clattered to the floor. A startled cry tore from her throat, but her rage gave her near-superhuman strength. She twisted, slashing Bill's arm with a hidden pocket knife. Philip rushed forward, kicking the scalpel away, and tried to grab Lucinda's wrist. She let out a feral scream, eyes wild, and she spun free, pointing the small blade at him. "I'll do what I must," she hissed, voice trembling with mania. Detective Foster and 2 uniformed officers finally arrived, guns drawn. "Drop the weapon," Foster commanded, her stance firm. For a heartbeat, Lucinda paused, eyes flicking from the cops to Jeremy, then to Philip. For a fleeting moment, a crack in her composure surfaced, a flicker of desperation or regret. But it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. In a startling move, she pressed the blade to her own throat. "I won't go to prison," Lucinda spat. "I refuse." Detective Foster inched forward, hand outstretched. "There's nowhere to run. Put the knife down." Lucinda's lips twisted. She glanced once more at Jeremy, at Philip, then gave a bitter, empty smile. "I guess this is goodbye," she whispered. In a swift, brutal motion, she slashed the blade across her neck. Philip recoiled, horror ripping through him. The officers sprang forward, trying to stop the bleeding, but Lucinda's eyes rolled back. Blood soaked her blouse. She stared at Philip with vacant malice for a moment longer before collapsing to the floor in a lifeless heap. In the stunned silence that followed, Bill clutched his wounded arm, wincing. Philip surged to Jeremy's bedside, gathering the trembling boy in his arms. Nurses rushed in to attend to Bill and confirm Lucinda's condition. Detective Foster slowly lowered her weapon, an unmistakable weariness in her stance. No one spoke for several seconds. The drama that had built around them for hours, the tension that weighed down every breath, seemed to dissipate at once, leaving a grim hush. Jeremy's shallow breathing became audible. "Dad," he murmured, eyes wet with tears. "Is she gone?" Philip nodded, pulling his son close. "Yes," he said hoarsely. "She can't hurt you anymore." The time slipped by in fragments of bright hospital lights, hushed murmurs of staff, and the distant beep of medical equipment. Lucinda's suicide sent shockwaves through the hospital. Detective Foster and her team spent hours processing the scene, taking statements, and dealing with the paperwork that such a traumatic event required. Bill received stitches for the gash on his arm, and despite the pain, he stuck around until he was certain Jeremy would recover fully. "You're a tough kid," he told Jeremy, carefully avoiding bumping his fresh bandages. "Strong enough to break a block of ice, I'd say." Jeremy looked at him, still a bit groggy, but he managed a smile. Philip set a hand on Bill's shoulder. "We owe you everything." Bill gave a modest shrug. "I just did what needed to be done." In the weeks that followed, father and son began piecing their lives back together. Jeremy's physical therapy helped him regain his energy, but the emotional scars were deeper. Nightmares plagued him, reliving the moment of being shoved into the lake. More than once, Philip woke to Jeremy's panicked cries. Each time, he held his son, whispering reassurances. They were safe now. Bill Anderson, hailed as a local hero, received a small medal from the Morningside Police Department. He insisted that he was just an ordinary guy, but the community disagreed. Articles were written about his bravery, about how one good deed could change everything. Soon, with detective work concluded, the police and hospital bills started piling up. Philip considered moving away from Morningside. The memories were too raw, but something in Jeremy's eyes each time they talked about leaving made Philip hesitate. His son didn't want fear to decide their future. Then, one crisp Saturday morning, father and son made a quiet decision. They got in the car, stopping for hot chocolate on the way, and headed to Melville Lake. The early spring sun glinted on the water, which was now free of ice, shimmering in delicate ripples. The forest beyond swayed gently, as if beckoning them with a promise of peace. Stepping onto the dock, Jeremy felt his heart pound. Memories of cold water and Lucinda's hatred flashed behind his eyes. Philip placed a comforting hand on Jeremy's shoulder. The boy took a shuddering breath. "Dad, I'm not scared anymore," he said, voice resolute. "She's gone." "Yes," Philip agreed, a subtle warmth spreading through his chest. Jeremy took a pebble from the shore and flicked it across the water. It bounced once, twice, then sank with a small splash. He smiled, the simple act feeling like a triumph. Philip watched his son in silence for a moment, absorbing the significance of that smile. This dock, which once held the darkest memory of their lives, was now just a place they could reclaim. Jeremy turned to his father. "Do you think it'll always hurt?" Philip knelt, holding his son's gaze. "It might, but it'll get easier, and we'll face it together." A breeze rustled the pines. Somewhere across the lake, a loon called out, its haunting cry echoing in the morning air. Jeremy held his father's hand, feeling the steady warmth that grounded him. They walked back along the dock, pausing briefly where Jeremy had slipped beneath the water. Now the lake's surface was calm, reflecting the blue sky overhead. In that moment, Jeremy understood something vital. His future stretched ahead, no longer overshadowed by Lucinda's malice. He was free to heal, to grow, to move on. Philip offered a gentle smile. "Ready to go home?" Jeremy nodded. "Yeah, I'm ready." They left the lake behind them, neither forgetting the past nor allowing it to rule their lives. And though neither spoke the words out loud, both father and son felt an inner promise blooming. Hope was stronger than any darkness they had endured, and together they would face whatever came next.